All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll begin. Welcome again to the Lubar Center at Eckstein Hall, Marquette University Law School. I'm Mike Goucher, and this is On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, people who are doing interesting and important work in this region and beyond. Today, we are joined by Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn, who after 10 years on the job in the city is about to retire. His final day of work, I think, is a week from Friday. He has been a frequent visitor to the law school, and we're back here for one final conversation. So please give a warm welcome to Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn. Warm reception. That's what you always get, right? 47 years. I got to ask you, what's going through your head right now as you put in the final few days?
Well, I have found to be a successful adult, there are certain coping mechanisms that have always helped me. One of them was rationalization. One of them was selective memory, and another one's been denial. And finally, there's compartmentalization. So, as I try to wrestle with the notion that I'm, laying down the career that I've devoted my life to, I'm dealing with it by not really thinking about it actively. I'm still engaged with the issues and still trying to reach out to the community and communicate in a meaningful way. I think it's really not going to hit me until a few weeks after I've left and start getting up in the morning without indigestion. So yeah, I'm going to have to relearn a stress-free environment and relearn not running on adrenaline. So right now, I'm trying to, be contemplative and at the same time try to draw some conclusions and lessons from my overall experience, not just the experience here, and share them with people who want to hear them. Because in the current news environment, I think perspective and context are the things that are always sacrificed first in the name of speed. And conflict, and having the opportunity I've had the last couple of weeks to engage in these kinds of conversations has helped me think through just what all we've been through.
When you announced your retirement, you likened yourself to a change agent, and I'm wondering, as you look at your time here in Milwaukee, what's been the biggest change that you brought to the Milwaukee Police Department and the city of Milwaukee?
Well, I mean, there's been an extraordinary array of changes, and before I go too deeply into that, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a moment and address some of my staff that are here today, because the changes that we have implemented and thought through are the product of their work. I've got with me Inspector Leslie Thiele. I've got with me Inspector Tom Stigler, who's currently running the Detective Bureau. Got with me Assistant Chief James Harpole, who has been an assistant chief now for the entire 10 years I've been here, and is thoroughly committed to his city, which he's devoted over 30 years to. And I've been very, very fortunate to have him shoulder to shoulder with me as we've done the best we could for this community and this department. Also have with me Captain Heather Worth, who's serving as my adjutant right now. And I also have with me Leslie Saletti, who's the director of our Office of Management and Planning, an office that did not exist 10 years ago. And if I were to segue off of that, I would say the Milwaukee Police Department really suffered at that time from a lack of an ability to know what it theoretically knew. And by that I meant police departments have always been terrific at assembling reports and theoretically amassing data, but were terrible for most of my career at having an ability to pull out that data, analyze it, and draw meaningful conclusions from it. And so developing an Office of Management Analysis and Planning, whose job was management analysis, and working with the private sector to improve our ability to make our information systems produce timely and relevant information, enabled us to better identify the threats and difficulties of this community, but also respond to them, and also fulfill our responsibility to the community to explain itself to itself. We function in an extraordinarily ideological political age in which everybody apparently is free to get their own facts. I mean, the saying used to be everybody's entitled to their opinion but not their own facts. Well, that's no longer true. Now people are entitled to their own facts as well. And it's my belief that our obligation in the police, given the fact that we are, you know, in many ways the canary in the coal mine. I mean, we are the first responders to all of the social ills of America. We are the institution that is the agency of first resort for the poor and the disadvantaged. Ironically, since we work so hard to create data subject to analysis interpretation, we frequently find ourselves the only institutions being held accountable for the problems of urban America. Now, you'd be hard-pressed to find data from any other component of the criminal justice system that tells you what they do or the impact of the totality of their decisions. And so we got much better at identifying problems, using problem-solving techniques to engage with them, much better at identifying communities in need of an array of interventions, and much better at trying to articulate the needs beyond policing that were needed to deal with the problems for which we are the first responders. And certainly one of our frustrations has been that over the course of the last 10 years, as America has engaged with issues such as mental health and the opioid crisis, problems revolving around the family, problems revolving around the homeless, it seems as though if you listen to the political discussion that there's no social problem in America so complicated that the solution isn't more training for the police. Okay, so our nation doesn't have a coherent mental health, policy. We have crisis intervention training for our police officers. All right, we don't have a coherent homeless policy beyond calling the cops and so, okay, we have homeless outreach teams. What's our opioid crisis, policy right now beyond talking about it? The cops have Narcan. Okay, and if you think about the number of intractable social problems that are dumped in the laps of our 25 to 30-year-old first responders, okay, we get it. We've always done more social work than crime fighting, and we did it when I started out, and we do it now, and we do it better with better training. But the rest of society still has a role to play in these problems beyond holding the police accountable for every single one of them, and every time there's a misstep, acting as though there's some huge institutional problem rather than the fact that there's nowhere to go beyond 911 for so many of the problems that afflict our communities. I think we've gotten better at telling that story to those who would listen. We've also gotten better at community organizing. We received a number of major federal grants for which we were considered test beds for using the police to develop neighborhood capacities to advocate for themselves and to cohere, because we recognized that our purpose for existing is to help, create and maintain neighborhoods that can sustain civic life. That is our mission statement. Okay, our mission statement isn't we're going to lock up lots of bad guys. Our mission statement is we need to create the social capital and informal social control at the neighborhood level so neighborhoods can do what they're supposed to do, which is provide a safe environment to pursue the American dream and raise your children. That's our goal. We've gotten much better at that in terms of community outreach and education and so on. We've embraced technology in its most appropriate way, whether it's information technology or technology having to do with protecting our officers or technology to reduce the need for pursuits or technology in developing criminal evidence, our National Integrated Ballistic Network system, coupled with our Shot Spotter, has led us to the position where we've been solving crimes at 30% higher than the national average for a city our size, because we're using that technology and marrying it to our institutional intelligence capabilities. So in terms of operations, technology, innovation, we've gotten national awards from the International Association of Chiefs of Police. We got an award from Cambridge University in England. We got an award from George Mason University in Virginia. The story of this police department positioning itself as a national leader in a number of areas is not well understood in an era of conflict journalism. But the people that sit at this table and the people that have benefited from these interventions know how much this agency has improved in the last decade.
You've said, and in this report that you issued at the time of your retirement announcement, you said by any objective standard, the Milwaukee Police Department is a model agency, and yet we have lawsuits that are underway right now. The American Civil Liberties Union is suing the police department, said it's been too aggressive in its stop and frisk program. That's their language. What do you say to your critics out there who say, no, it's not all seashells and balloons, as Al McGuire would say, and there are things that are still problematic in the Milwaukee Police Department?
There are things that are problematic in the challenges to which we are called upon to respond. And like any institution whose brand is crisis and whose members are called upon to intervene in the most violent, heavily armed society in the industrialized world, there are times we don't meet our own standards. And the evaluation of the agency is how does it respond in terms of discipline, training, and preventive programs to deal with officer misconduct while still protecting its ability to be effective dealing with the social problems that it's called upon to intervene. I've been extremely frustrated by the fact that there has been this, coordinated effort to vilify and demonize this police department for the sole purpose of developing constituencies at our expense and no interest in learning the truth of the matter. Fundamental issue in policing, all right? Disparity is not bias. Now, let me repeat this. Disparity is not the same as bias. Now, the wonderful thing about the ACLU suing us or anybody else is they ask us to prove a negative. Now, anybody here who's in law school, can you prove a negative? Anybody ever be on a debating team? Can you prove a negative? The answer is no, you can't prove a negative. So if you accuse us of bias, how do I prove we're not? All right? I mean, there are disparities in this country that are unconscionable. And when we have been trying to explain to this city what's going on in it, one of the tools we used was a density map, a heat map. Where are the problems concentrated? So, of course, when we do a heat map or a concentration of violent crime in the city, it's very clear what neighborhoods those are in. I said, okay, I know how this is going to turn out, but let's create a document we can share with the political environment and community groups. I want that same density map to reflect the greatest concentration of abandoned and foreclosed homes. Okay, I want that density map to reflect the unemployment in the city of Milwaukee. All right, now, put on that density map, where is poverty concentrated in this city? Okay, lastly, let's see, where is the greatest percentage of high school dropouts located? Okay, where are the most fire department responses in this city for structure fires and first aid calls? Those ellipses are all the same neighborhoods. Now, we're called upon to deal with the symptom of poverty that's violent crime. And if you're an African American in this city, you are 18 times more likely to be shot than a white person. The victimization rate for non-fatal shootings in this city for African Americans is 250 per 100,000. For white folks, I think it was 49. All right? We have got a serious problem, and the greatest disparity in this city is being a victim of violent crime. And the people who actually live in those neighborhoods understandably demand that we position ourselves to be helpful in protecting them from violence. Now, you can read that entire suit filed by the ACLU, and you will see not one single word about crime. If you cherry pick the disparity of what we do where we do it to reduce the disparity of crime, you can say, well, look how biased that is. They're not doing that over here in the middle-class neighborhood where absolutely nothing happens. Now, I've got a moral obligation to take risks on behalf of the community, and one of the risks I have been willing to take is being vilified, willfully misunderstood, and sued for doing our job. Now, that's not the same as protecting overt misconduct, which we have taken a very strong stand with and have, done some pretty significant things that have generated a great deal of animosity from the collective bargaining unit. But the point is, we've tried to both explain to our community what's happening in it and respond to those genuine concerns of neighborhoods that are afflicted by violence. And I know this, I said it years ago, if we respond to the desires of neighborhoods, we are going to generate disparities that will be used against us by interest groups. And it's exactly what's happened, and the unwillingness to confront both issues at the same time. What generates this disparity in policing, and what about the disparity in victimization? In this city, the majority of victims of every violent crime are poor people of color. Every single crime. We're there doing both community policing and anti-crime policing, and we work hard to connect the two. But if you just want to do a data dump, we're sitting ducks, because we're where we're supposed to be, trying to help people where they actually live.
Let me ask you a very simple question, direct question. When you took office, when you were sworn in, you said our measurement of success would be reducing fear and disorder and crime. You argue that crime is down from when you took office, and you say you have numbers to back that up. But what about the notion of fear? Has that really changed? Do people feel less afraid in Milwaukee than when you took office 10 years ago?
I would say fear is a tough issue because one of the things folks don't understand about police engagement on quality of life issues is the synergy between quality of life indicators and fear versus crime statistics and fear. So, for example, the crime statistics may indicate a downward trend in a given neighborhood. But if in that neighborhood people are suffering vandalism or see unabated graffiti or feel that their neighborhood is under assault from loud noise and disorderly parties in some house on that, they feel fear because they don't feel that there is sufficient social control in their public spaces, that they feel uncomfortable in their public spaces. And the inability to access public spaces creates its own reality where people behave in response to their fears, not necessarily the reality of their potential victimization. This is also hurt by the unfortunate trend of the local news media to portray, Milwaukee, and I've seen this in every metropolitan area. What leads the news every night is who shot who in wherever your highest crime neighborhood is. So the lead off in every metropolitan area, and certainly here, is let's generate anti-city stories that scare the suburbanites. Okay? And then we do the weather, and then we talk about the Packers, okay? So it's who shot who, here's the weather, here's the Packers, that's it. So it's a loop. But the problem is for the city that inaccurately portrays the real, authentic life of this city. It has an impact on its economic viability, it has an impact on its competitiveness, and it has an impact on the morale of its residents. And when residential morale suffers, neighborhood cohesion suffers. One of the things the police can do as convening authorities is get the neighborhood to work together on common problems. If you live in a neighborhood of strangers and you feel your public space is dominated by folks who are antisocial, you become socially isolated and your fear increases, okay? And to the extent that the neighborhood is seen as not quote, in control, other problems often arise. So the engagement of the police, not unilaterally, but with the neighborhood, in quality of life issues is a way of also ultimately dealing with crime issues. What people consciously did was misinterpret George Kelling's theory of broken windows, okay? That theory was never a, quote, zero tolerance theory mandating arrest. Never, 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 never. I've known George for 25 years, okay? I know the research he did. I knew the replication studies. What it was the police had abandoned engaging in quality of life issues to answer 911 calls and to, quote, fight crime. And what he and other research noticed was those quality of life issues were leading to a fraying of the social contract of neighborhoods. And when those neighborhoods began to fray and appear weak and disorderly, additional predation occurred. The role of the police, he posited, was to work with the neighborhood to pay attention to signs of disorder, not arrest everybody for minor crimes, to pay attention, to engage, to move on, to jawbone, to warn. That's what it's all about, and that's our misdemeanors for quality of life have, and engendered criticism, declined dramatically in the last 10 years. We don't use enforcement to move quality of life because we're doing it by engaging with the neighborhoods. Now, we still get criticized for intervening in the first place, but the point is our enforcement activities have purposely declined in order not to impose, criminal records on people for minor behaviors, but also to facilitate our engagement with those issues in a way that the neighborhoods didn't find burdensome.
So very briefly, because I do think the perception of crime is an issue in this community. I said earlier that according to the 2017 crime stats, numbers in most categories are down. That's just what I'm saying. What did the numbers say? Very briefly, go through a few categories and tell us what they say in 2017 about Milwaukee.
Well, they say good things about 17 compared to 16, and they say good things about 17 compared to the year before I was here. I mean, over the last 10 years, you wouldn't know this to listen to some of our politicians whose hair is always on fire, but overall crime in this city is down 30% over 10 years. Now, last year was only a 4% decline. Okay? But if you add 4% and 5% and 6% and 9%, guess what? I mean, if your stock market was going up that much every year, you'd be throwing confetti up in the air. All right? The point is we keep making incremental significant changes. The thing that was most concerning to me is that over the course of most of my first 8 years, we had record-breaking low homicide rates. And then in 15 and 16, we went through the roof. Okay? 146 and 142, they're like emblazoned on my mind. We also noticed that 2/3 of the major cities in America also had significant increases in homicide in those 2 years, and there's some speculation as to some of the things that were going on. But we continued to make progress in 2017. So our homicide rate was down by 16%, our robberies were down by 12%, our stolen cars were significantly down, our carjackings were down by something like 12 or 13%. We made an impact on the public space crimes that most define people's willingness to use their public space, even at the same time as, some of our city council friends were, screaming about how out of control the city's streets were and how weak we were on crime. We've made very strong progress, and we've done it at the same time as maintaining strong grassroots support in the neighborhoods for our efforts.
But why do you think you made progress in 2017? What changed between 2015, 2016, and then 2017? What's different about it?
I think, theoretically, one reason 15 and 16 was so bad for the major cities of America is that a national narrative took hold post-Ferguson that portrayed policing as fundamentally flawed and fundamentally biased, and brought national attention to every incident of police misconduct they could without any countervailing narrative about what the police were dealing with or the overall performance of the agencies. I mean, when I started this business, policing was nowhere near as professional as it is, nowhere near as selective, nowhere near as highly trained in as many areas, nowhere near as diverse, and certainly nowhere near as restrained in the overall use of force as it is now. I mean, you would not, if you're going to understand police use of force, in some ways you have to break down where is it being used and how does it stack up against the environment in which it occurs. And, we're in an environment in this city where the use of force has declined 25% in the last 4 years. Okay? Our citizen complaints have declined 70% in the last 10 years. All right? Now, these aren't my data. These are objective data of other people. We have our uses of force and our citizen complaint process is audited every year by the Fire and Police Commission using the University of Wisconsin here in Madison. They're the ones that did our public satisfaction survey 2 years ago and found a 75% support in the police, in the community for the efforts of the police department. All of those facts seem to be blissfully ignored in the context of the narrative that developed in 15 and 16. And it backed the police up everywhere. I mean, it undermined their legitimacy. It undermined their effectiveness. It resulted in a level of defiance among heavily armed criminals that was mirrored in significant increases in non-fatal shootings and homicides. I think it's attenuated somewhat in the last year or so, and we've gotten, I think, better at applying our analytical capability to be more surgical in our anti-crime approaches, which I think has helped as well. There is no one kind of homicide. There are many different kinds of homicide, and different approaches to lower domestic homicide are going to be different than, attempts to lower gang-related homicide or drug-related homicide or homicide occurring in the course of, robberies and carjackings. They require all different approaches. And our ability to segment the types of homicide we deal with and deal with appropriate situational factors, I think, has helped us be more effective in reducing that total.
So you don't think the spike in violent crime in Milwaukee had anything to do with an explosion of the drug trade, heroin trafficking, opioid trafficking? You don't think that's related to it?
I think the biggest connection to our homicide specific to here has been the flooding of our streets with high-quality firearms and the fact that they easily find themselves in the hands of people with criminal histories.
Your pleas for changes have not resulted in any changes.
No.
They've fallen on deaf ears.
They have. Well, I mean, when an issue becomes ideological instead of practical, facts don't matter. I mean, we all understand that, right? I mean, this notion of, quote, alternative facts, I mean, everybody like to laugh at it. That's our reality, folks. And when the state legislature decided to, like, reform the gun bill and make it, make it possible to get concealed carry permits, they took their marching orders from the National Rifle Association. They didn't ask for information from the streets of Milwaukee. And so they fashioned a law that permits people that are defined as career criminals by statute to lawfully get firearms permits to carry concealed weapons. Now, you don't think that had an impact on my homicide rate? Every year since that law has passed, the number of non-fatal shootings in this city has increased. The number of homicides with firearms has increased. The number of guns we have taken from arrested criminals has increased. And due time to crime, which is something we do with the ATF, when was this gun first legally purchased? How soon was it used in a crime? That usually tells you how bad your straw purchasing is. Our time to crime is one of the lowest in the country right now in terms of point of purchase and use in a crime. Now, when I point those facts out, I have, of course, am accused of being anti-Second Amendment, as opposed to, no, I'm just anti-giving guns to criminals. I mean, did John Adams and Thomas Jefferson really say that there's an unvarnished right of highwaymen and pirates to have high-quality guns? Is that what they were saying? Because I don't think so, okay? And so that's my position. That's the position of other major city chiefs, but every time I get caught talking about it, my in-basket fills up with people who only type in capital letters, okay? And so there's no neutral ground to have a thoughtful conversation about, I get why people want pistol permits. I'm not objecting to people getting them that feel they need them, that are otherwise law-abiding. I am against ideologically driven laws that create real consequences of wounded and dead people on the streets of my city. That concerns me, and unfortunately our current state of political discourse doesn't permit that kind of a nuance.
Let me have you address two of the most frequent criticisms I've heard of Ed Flynn during your tenure in Milwaukee. One of them is, and you hear this from council members of the Common Council, he doesn't communicate with us. There's not enough back and forth. We don't know enough about what he's doing. He's not a good listener in terms of what we're saying. Your relationship has, I could say safely, has deteriorated with the Common Council over time.
Yeah.
Why is that? What do you say to that criticism?
They're right.
On which one of those? The listening,
Well, one of the things I've learned as an administrator, and this is true whatever business you're in, is you surround yourself with people who make up for your weaknesses, okay? And one of my weaknesses in government life is suffering fools gladly. I know that, okay? And people have told me when I think I have a poker face at a public meeting, and I mean seriously, I think I'm being like, what my people tell me is I'm like, okay, and I'm not meaning to do that, but the person who is saying the stupid thing to me perceives from me a lack of respect and deference. So what I did for many years when I was here was have a chief of staff who was smart, skilled, personable, and would go meet council members and deal with and a lot of the constituent issues get taken care of by my district commanders, okay? That's never been a problem. They've always had free reign to call up a police district and say, so-and-so on such and such a street needs a this and that, and they do it, okay? What they weren't getting was care and feeding from me. They got care and feeding from my chiefs of staff. But when I lost my last one, for a variety of political reasons, I was not permitted to hire another one. So I lost a huge amount of the day-to-day, hi, how you doing, what's new and what's hot, what's not, how can I help you out? And I'm not denigrating that. That's the grease of the axles of politics. That's why I have a person do it who's better than me at that, who doesn't go, all right? So I did lose that, but I kept having to go to public meetings and be told stupid stuff to which I made faces that, kind of invited criticism of me that I understand intellectually, okay? And also know that part of the problem is that for political reasons I wasn't allowed to solve the problem. And so things kind of, when you're away from the gossip, when you're away from the city hall bubble, it is a little bit like middle school. People keep talking about you. You just don't know what they're saying. by the time you do get over there, it's like, everybody's mean to me. What happened? What's going on? And it's like, well, you don't do this, and you didn't do that. Oh, okay. So criticism of my affect is valid, and believe it or not, I've struggled with it, but it's not like we didn't try to fix it, but there was a lot of three-dimensional chess going on there for a while that interfered with our ability to solve that problem.
So the other thing that I'd like to ask you about is more of a policy-related question, and you hear a lot of people in the city talk about this. A few years ago, there was a change in police department policy in the way you did high-speed pursuits. It was restricted in terms of how often you would engage in a high-speed pursuit. Yep. And there are people, I'm sure, in this room who think that led to some of the crazy driving we see around town, or led to more violent crime, drug dealers doing business out of their cars and then speeding away from police. In retrospect, was that a wise decision to pull back a bit on the high-speed pursuit policy?
The interesting thing is that from a national perspective, more cities are going to that policy than the one that's been imposed on me. And allow me to provide some context. Because again, whoever seizes control of the narrative or devises a shorthand for the issue often wins the day, even though they don't have the facts on their side. Our restrictions on pursuits became the no pursuit policy. Now, our criminal community are consumers of the news. I mean, they like to see themselves on the news. Yeah, I did that, okay? So they pay attention, and the unrelenting message out of City Hall was the police department was no longer chasing criminals. And I think they picked up on it. Because the interesting thing is, while my policy was in place, we were engaging in more pursuits than ever before in real numbers. The limitation I put on the policy was we weren't going to chase people for motor vehicle infractions. We weren't going to chase people if the only violation was a stolen car, and I'll explain that later. But we were going to chase cars that were wanted in violent crimes. We were going to chase people driving cars that were wanted for violent crimes, and we were going to chase, people for robberies and car thefts and shootings and so on. Okay, we chased a lot of bad guys. Why did I change the traffic infraction piece? Well, apparently, from what I can learn, the surviving families of dead, innocent people killed in police pursuits don't have political representation in this town. People forget that about 5 years ago, I had 4 innocent people killed in 5 weeks in police pursuits. All right? Dead, 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 dead. I personally knew that the largest number of dead officers was in traffic accidents. In one of my prior iterations, I buried 2 officers killed in the same accident, chasing a guy whose offense turned out to be an open container of beer in his car. It's inherently dangerous. It's an unguided missile. And in those pursuits here in Milwaukee, our officers followed our then policy. They had, in fact, turned their lights off and stopped the pursuit, but it didn't stop the idiot from driving like an idiot. And so I made the decision to limit the pursuits. Now, why did I say don't chase stolen cars? Well, maybe in the old days, when people stole a horse, they got hanged. But in 21st century Milwaukee, if you steal a car, you're sent home that night. Okay? Please, this is not hyperbole. I don't know of anybody who went to jail in my 10 years for stealing a car. Now, why am I risking your life to catch that person? Why am I doing that? Now, if we recover the car, we got the Alpers cars to look up license plates so we could get parked cars off the street. We've invested in something called Star Chase that shoots a dart that attaches to the car as GPS. We'll find the car later. When we find the car later, we dust for fingerprints. We arrest people for having been in the stolen car. Now, they're never charged with a stolen car. I mean, to my knowledge, no one has ever been charged with being a car thief. Okay, everybody's charged with operating an auto without the owner's consent. So my career car thieves, what do they know? They get to be a cool kid. They get to impress their peer group. Nothing happens to them, and they get to play Grand Theft Auto in real time. I'm not going to risk your life to do that. Now, when my critics on the city council decided that, of course, it was because the police weren't pursuing, that there was more perceived crime and there had been an increase in crashes, that's undeniable. The solution, of course, was to go back to another policy rather than find out what was going on. You know, when I went to a meeting and put out all of the facts about other departments' policies and what the statistical breakdown is, who we were arresting and what was happening to them, nobody cared. Why I make faces, okay? So nobody cared about any of that. All right, the political expedience was knee-jerk, chase people more. Now, what can I tell you? Okay, year to date, I've got more pursuits than I had last year at this time. And last year, we had 11 crashes and pursuits involving police cars, and so far we have 6. Now, that's 11 in 12 months. That's 6 in 6 weeks. What do you think? Oh, that's that boring data.
But they're going to argue crime is down. They're going to say homicides are down so far this year. Crime was down at the end of last year since the policy changed. That would be the argument. That started in September, and we were certainly down in all those categories long before the pursuit policy was changed. So they haven't got that argument going for them. But, I mean, I function under authority, so I may think the directive is wrong-headed and short-sighted and dangerous, but ultimately, after I've made my case, okay, we got to implement it. So my officers are out there driving around, you know, many of them have only known the policy we had, trying to figure out which tinted window car they should be chasing and which one not, because the original directive was chase tinted window cars. Now, given everybody's concern about, quote, profiling, I thought that was almost laughably foolish. So at least we got that changed to probable cause to believe there was a drug deal. But it is, it's a policy that we're going to have to continue to evaluate its outcome. But I don't want folks to think, A, that we weren't chasing dangerous criminals, or B, that we weren't catching them. We were doing both. We just were trying to limit your risk in our attempts to do both. Let me have you, since you're leaving town, let me have you address a couple of things in the news. There's a new piece of legislation that a couple of Republican lawmakers in Madison and the Milwaukee Police Association support, which would allow them to have a greater say in who's appointed to the Fire and Police Commission, also would keep police officers being paid despite being, I think, what's the accurate way of saying, under investigation for, for certain actions. So, but what it sounds like is that there are people out there trying to change the way the Fire and Police Commission operates and change the way the business is done. Do we need change on the Fire and Police Commission? Do you support the kind of legislation that's being talked about?
Okay, we start from the premise right now that things are a mess. Here's a general rule. Anytime the police union suggests a law to the Republican legislature for the Democratic city of Milwaukee, be suspicious of their intent and motivation, all right? In this state, this is the strongest authority of the state over local home rule that I've ever seen in my career. This is the 4th state I've worked in. I've never lived in a place where the state could impose its will on the people of the city. And since they seldom do it for the city's good, that's troubling, all right? It's also troubling when you consider this is the legislature that so happily embraced Act 10 to get rid of all those dreadful, terrible unions, and their strongest ally is the police union. All right? So just be generally suspicious of the intent. The intent is to undermine accountability. Now, here's the irony. The same Fire and Police Commission has such antipathy for me, who's like fired people that made the union vote no confidence in me, has been having executive sessions with the union where it complained about me and my discipline, while the union goes to the state to undermine the commission's authority. You following that convoluted diagram? Remember how much I hated diagram sentences when I was in grammar school, okay? Diagram that sentence. Figure out how it is that the union is using their complaints about my accountability of them to the commission to undermine their support for me, while the same union at the same time is trying to undermine the authority of the commission by getting a law passed that dilutes its ability to hold officers accountable. Now that's a dysfunctional mess, and that's what we've got, okay? For over 100 years, the Fire and Police Commission was the firewall between politics and the police department. All right, Milwaukee, but back in olden days, and some of you I think are old enough to actually remember having read history, Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive in the context of the progressive movement about governmental reform, okay? Now progressive means I'm not really a liberal, okay? Okay, progressivism, the progressive movement in American politics was at the turn of the last century. It meant professionalizing government, insulating it from partisan politics, believing in the notion of expertise, supporting ideas of civil service reform, and creating government effectiveness accountable to politics, but not completely dominated by it. And that was the struggle of the 20th century. What sadly happened in the last few years is the Fire and Police Commission has become actively part of the political process. Now, in the short term, people get to use it as a platform to run for office. In the long term, it undermines the firewall between partisanship and the police. And right now, if you're paying attention to City Hall, there's a handful of aldermen still trying to govern, and a bunch of aldermen that are really about exerting partisan political control over key institutions. And it's old-time politics raising its head in a new century. And folks ought to be concerned about it. So the proposal to change the FBC in Madison is dreadful for the city. But the unholy alliance the current FBC made with the union is also dreadful for the city. And I would just urge all of you who are trying to pay attention to local governance to pay attention, all right? Sadly, you know way more than you need to know about who shot John last night in the Packers. Nobody in this town seems to have any idea the dysfunction that's occurring in City Hall right now, okay? I mean, really, the division of powers and this notion of checks and balances is in the process of being blown up. The police department is the first agency of government in those crosshairs right now, but believe me, this story is not over. And a lot of the institutions of balance and checks and balances this city has erected over the last century are being quite happily violated right now, and it's in nobody's interest.
I saw an interview you gave in the last week or so in which you were very critical of the current process for selecting a new chief. And I thought it was interesting that you decided to weigh in on that. Why do you feel, what's wrong with the process? That we're having a public hearing tonight on the near south side. There'll be another one on the north side with the two remaining finalists for the interim chief job. But why do you think they're going about this the wrong way? Why did you feel that you wanted to say something about this?
Well, the two most important appointed positions in the city are the superintendent of schools and the police chief. Nothing else comes close. One is your long-term investment in the future, and the other one is your daily investment in the health and safety of your community. Nothing's more important than you have a process that's thoughtful, that's non-political, and that attempts to appoint someone to that job that has the appropriate professional bona fides and is not beholden to any particular interest group that would affect the quality of their decisions. In the chief's job, you have to be willing to alienate everybody at some point. All right, back during those terrible days of the Red Arrow Park incident, I fired the officer involved in it. And while that was going on, those folks that were taking to the streets were demanding that I get fired, and the police union was voting no confidence in me at the same time. Now, I like to think at that moment I brought the police and the community together. But the point is, it was important, I believe, for our accountability system to note when competence creates a deadly force incident absent criminality. I know the cop hadn't committed a crime. I knew desires to get him prosecuted would fail because, when you make that kind of decision, at the point he made the decision, he had no choice. But I said, listen, he had another choice earlier on, and because he took that misstep and made that wrong decision, he doesn't deserve jail, but I can't trust him to be a cop anymore. Now, at that moment, that was a bold decision. Nobody had ever done that before. Historically, in this town, if you weren't indicted, you kept your job. Now, I wasn't trying to pander to the advocacy community. I felt our profession had to hold itself accountable. Otherwise, people would say cops should go to jail when they make a mistake. Now, we don't do that to doctors, okay? We shouldn't do it to cops when they're operating in crisis, under pressure, and under threat. But we get a right to examine their decision-making to put them in that process and hold them accountable for it. Now, obviously, the union didn't like that, and the community often didn't understand it. But I'm using that story to say you've got to be willing to make the left and the right mad at you. I mean, I can literally go to the public safety meeting of the city council, and some people here know that, they've seen it happen, and get berated because I'm soft on crime. Berated, ripped apart. And in the afternoon, I can go to the Judd-Ledge Committee and find out that I'm engaged in racially biased policing and I am oppressing the poor. Same day, same building, same governing body. So a chief's got to be willing to do that for professional values. That means the process that selects a chief has to put those values first. Okay? That's not what's happening here. Now, when I say what I'm about to say, this is objective fact, all right? Not because Jim Harpole is my friend now and associate and bleeds Milwaukee blue, but because it's what other big cities do. If you're going to have a vacancy in the chief, you make the second in command the interim chief while the process occurs. Why? Because you want continuity and stability while the inherently destabilizing process of selecting a leader takes place. Now, the chairman of the commission said in the paper, well, we're not comfortable making the assistant chief the acting chief. Okay, what are you comfortable doing? Oh, we're going to destabilize the department. We're going to have a process pitting the commanders against each other to be interim chief, pick somebody, and then theoretically in a few months do the process again, pitting them against each other again, when they have to count on each other to be successful as the interim chief. You following me? Okay, it's destabilizing. People in the department are human. They want to pick a winner. All right? They want to line up with somebody. So you don't do it that way. And when I was at the Major City Chiefs meeting 2 weeks ago, I took a poll of the entire room of the 65 big cities in America. Nobody does a process for interim chief. So you make an interim chief, then you reach out to the Police Executive Research Forum or the International Association of Chiefs of Police or the Major City Chiefs Association, and you say, here is an RFP for helping us select a new chief in a nationwide recruitment. Then they put together a process, and then a rational process occurs over some period of months while an interim chief keeps the trains running on time, responds to crisis, and keeps moving forward. They didn't do any of that. They've done it perversely, completely wrong. And in the last 3 weeks, they have said interim chief is going to be a short period of time. Well, maybe it'll be the 2 years of the unexpired term. Well, who knows if we like them? Maybe we'll give them a 4-year term. Now, this has all been in the press. Now, these are the folks that are controlling the appointment process for this essential civic institution whose chief can't be seen as the creature of any interest group. And right now, the process they are using for, quote, community input is highly skewed. All right? If you want to know what the community thinks, you go to the community. You go to the neighborhood meetings where the people in the neighborhood work with the police about their problems. If you call a group meeting, who's going to come to the group meeting? Self-styled activists, shaking their fists and getting on television because TV likes conflict journalism. So the process right now is skewed towards appeasing a very narrow slice of opinion in this city and totally ignoring the larger interests of the community in what they expect from their police department, balancing both accountability and effectiveness. And that's troubling. And this is why I said before, the mess that's unfolding at City Hall right now is hitting your police department first, but don't think for a minute it's over unless people start paying attention, asking hard questions, and having people like Mike Goucher, no, I'm serious, but there's very little in-depth journalism in this town. How much is there? How many shows are there in this town where a credible reporter says, 4 or 5 questions deep rather than what's your soundbite, chief? What's your soundbite, alderman? What's your soundbite, commission member, right? You can't make decisions based on soundbite journalism. And what's missing right now is somebody actually, you guys, this isn't a spectator sport democracy. We need you to start paying attention to what's going on in your name.
Are you disappointed that Assistant Chief Harpole decided to withdraw from the process and retire?
Well, everybody here should be. Let me put it this way. Everybody here should be. I'm not going to speak for him, right. But he's certainly got a pretty strong sense of the direction of this process, and I give him enormous credit for courage of basically saying, I'm not going to legitimize it anymore. So,
my apologies, I'm going to run short on questions today, but let me finish up with 2 real quick ones. So I asked you this on my TV show, but your advice for the next chief, and you said he or she should speak truth to power. Mm-hmm. So for the people who, that amazing few who did not watch my TV show, what did you mean by the next chief should speak truth to power?
Well, I mean, the cliche is truth to power means somebody at a neighborhood meeting, you know, giving testimony and reaming out a public official. But in that world, nobody takes a risk. Whoever, you know, reams out the public official is going to get a laudatory soundbite on television, and, you know, and that's all wonderful. Truth to power as a risk to your employment is being a civil servant and providing elected officials with information that confounds their preconceptions. Now, we live in an era of ideological politics in which politicians seem to think the world should conform to their prior notions rather than perhaps they should adjust their attitudes towards what the world reveals to them through data analysis. So a role of a police chief isn't just to make critical decisions, hold his agency accountable, reach out to her community, you know, effectively deal with crime, while at the same token making sure that the policing approaches are fair and unbiased. It also requires us to go to those public meetings and share the truth without making a face. That sometimes undermines your truth. But to go to those meetings and say, here are the facts, here's what we understand the truth to be, respond to this reality. My greatest frustration over these last few years is, you know, race, crime, poverty, crucial issues co-located. And I have been unable to get any of our elected officials in this town to while they are expressing concerns about police tactics and the disparities generated by them, to at the same time entertain the discussion about the grotesque disparities in crime victimization in this community and that impact of crime on the ability of neighborhoods to rise above poverty itself. Okay? Now understand this. I know all social, racial, and economic groupings commit sin at the same level. And I know they all want to get high on something or other at the same percentage. But public space violence is perpetrated by the poor upon the poor overwhelmingly. Why do you think they call prison wagons paddy wagons? Because for 100 years they were filled with my people. All right? That is the essence of our challenge in responding to that violence in a meaningful, restrained, which is one of our values, and constitutional way. But respond to it we must, and it will generate, quote, disparities. If we can't have an intelligent conversation of when a disparity is justified and when it's not justified and something to be concerned about, then we're never going to get to the heart of what everybody claims to be concerned about, which is police accountability and public safety. And my frustration, the frustration of many of my colleagues, is no matter how much of this data we throw at our public officials, for the right wing, we're soft on crime and anti-gun, and for the left wing, we are conveniently biased against the poor. That is not helping us solve the problems of our cities. That's my frustration. That's what the next chief's got to engage with, and the chief after that, because sooner or later, if we get past the politicians, the community will understand that that dialogue's got to take place. And then maybe then we can make progress on those essential issues.
So final question, I'll keep it brief. What's next for you? Besides being a media critic, what else is on your plate when you leave?
The short term, really nothing much. I'm going to get back to Virginia. That's where my family is, my children, my grandchildren. Get back in touch with being grandpa. You know, I've only been able to see them every 6 weeks or so. I want to spend a lot of time with them. I think probably after a couple of months of my family getting really tired of my pacing around and yelling at the news, I'll be in my bathroom with my bathrobe and my cup of coffee. What are you talking about? That's crazy. Probably sometime I'll get into consulting. There's a lot of good firms in that area. A couple of them reached out to me. But in the short term, I think I really need to de-stress a little bit, despite how relaxed I'm appearing. I do need to let some of that go and get off this adrenaline thing and, reconnect with my people.
All right, I'm going to take one or two really quick questions before we go. But it's got to be quick. They can't be speeches, so just keep them short. We'll go right here. You've got the hat, and press down on that button. It says push, and just keep pushing on it until we can hear your question.
Got it. Thank you for coming. My question is, In light of the news and the focus on police brutality and the immense stress that police officers go under when acting in high crime areas, such as the areas you mentioned before, what steps is the Milwaukee Police Department doing, and what would you like to see moving forward with mandatory psychological evaluations for those officers who are in high crime, high violence areas?
Well, that's a good question. One of the things we do is evaluate our uses of force. We look for outliers. We report on the uses of force internally and externally. We're very aware of what the metrics are. We're very aware of the conditions under which uses of force take place. We have a very robust early intervention program that monitors police officer performance across a variety of metrics and looks for folks that may be having problems adjusting or post-traumatic issues. I mean, don't think for a minute officers don't have post-traumatic stress syndrome. I mean, they do. I mean, they see evil in its home, if you will. They're used to being lied to by absolutely everybody. They are dealing with crisis constantly, and it can exhaust one's emotional reserves when it comes to making good decisions. Under my administration, as I say, we created the early intervention program. We've hired a police psychologist. We do deep dives into officers' use of force, and when you perceive somebody is an outlier, we get them counseling. So it's not so much like, you use force, so we're mandatorily sending you to a psychologist, but rather we have a constant series of interventions with officers in terms of both training and monitoring to make sure that somebody isn't having issues, and to, if they are having issues, to adjust them through either therapy or training.
One more question before we go, if we can keep it really brief, yes.
Hi, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service. Is community-based policing in trouble in our community?
Is community-based policing in trouble in our community is the question.
No, it's being ignored by our critics. I mean, this group came forward not long ago, and I mean, we were having a hard time interacting with them because they came to us, the Community Coalition for Quality Policing, and they said, we want to bring the Cincinnati Police Department in here because they do problem-oriented and community-based policing, and we think the Milwaukee Police Department needs to learn from them. So I said, well, did you know the Cincinnati Police Department came here 2 years ago to see what we were doing on problem-oriented community-based policing? Well, no, they didn't, but they still invited them anyway. I mean, we brought in the PowerPoint. Here's an award from the Herman Goldstein Institute. He's the guy, the father of problem-oriented policing, that we got from problem-oriented policing. Here's our award from the International Association of Chiefs of Police, their highest award for community-based policing. Okay, here's our induction into the Evidence-Based Policing Hall of Fame at George Mason University. Here is the MetLife Foundation Award for Community Engagement and Civic Support. None of it mattered because I'm in an environment now where the facts don't matter. I am coming to you with what you should do. Listen to me, period. Because you had a critical incident. Therefore, you must not be doing all these other things. Well, guess what? Some of our most revered institutions, whether it's emergency room surgery or the Marines and Army in Afghanistan, sometimes fall short of their professional standards and err terribly with loss of life. But we're not discrediting the United States Marine Corps or surgery. We're saying you need licenses, you need training, there needs to be accountability, there needs to be distinctions between willful malpractice versus error in judgment. These are all the things we are wrestling with as a profession, but our shortcomings should not be the defining standard by which we examine everything else we're doing at the same time. And by objective standards, and by that I meant objective metrics. I mean, when I did my deposition with the ACLU, I was happily engaged in a debate because the ignorance revealed in their questions proved to me they had no idea what they were talking about in terms of what this police department was actually doing. Okay? Whatever their motivations are, and I know their motives are pure, the bottom line is they're incorrect. But they want a solution to this perceived problem that is going to put people's lives at risk by depolicing vulnerable communities. And that's the challenge, is creating venues for honest exchanges of ideas. Pick the facts you decide are the most valid. All right? You get the right to decide which fact to you should be weighted more seriously. I get that part. That's not like having different facts, just weighting them differently. But we need environments to, in fact, have that fuller discussion, and they're very rare in this current political climate, and that does no one good.
I'm going to wrap things up. A couple of quick things before we go. Our next event is a week from today. I think it's a full room, but you can watch it on our live streaming of the event on our website, law.marquette.edu. It's with Secretary Mark Hogan. He's the Secretary of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. He'll be talking about the Foxconn deal, which, of course, has gotten a lot of attention. And then the following week, we've got a couple of good events. On Tuesday, I believe the 20th, we have Stephen Olacara. He's a young guy who's head of a group called the Millennial Action Project. He's from Wisconsin originally, Brookfield. He's now out in Washington, but he's trying to bridge the great divide in our politics, and he's trying to do it by working with younger folks, because he figures the rest of us are hopeless. So he'll be with us on that Tuesday. I think there's still a few seats left for that. It should be good. Having said that, and again, I say this every time, and I mean it sincerely, thank you so much for your time, your interest, and your attention. And most of all, thanks to our guest, the retiring Milwaukee Police Chief, Ed Flynn. Thank you.